Good morning, News Talk 1330 WLBB. It is currently 8:31 on the WLBB News Clock. This is the Community Voice program, hosted twice a week here with yours truly, Adam Uglum, here with a little political insight and just a totally different perspective than you hear on other radio stations. Because let's face it, not every other radio station has a 23-year-old political scientist at the helm. Lots of things to talk about today. Hopefully we're going to tie it all together with we're going to call it the crisis the country is facing. But I want to start by saying this, that Athens, the city of Athens in Greece, not the city of Athens in Georgia, the city of Athens in Greece is on fire. 45 buildings yesterday afternoon were in flames during violent street protests against government austerity measures late yesterday and overnight last night. This from Business Week. Prime Minister Lucas Papademos won parliamentary approval early today for the spending cuts needed to secure an international bailout of 130 billion euros, about $172 billion. The measures equal about 7% of gross domestic product over 3 years and include a debt swap that would shave 100 billion euros off of more than 200 billion euros of privately held debt. Greece was granted its first aid package of 110 billion euros in May, nearly 2 years ago in 2010. A total of 170 businesses in Athens suffered attacks during the protests. The Athens Chamber of Commerce and Industry said today in a statement on its website. Initial estimates put the cost of damage to buildings and equipment as well as from theft at tens of millions of euros, the chamber said. 17 banks, 4 bookstores, 5 department stores and shopping malls, 70 clothing and footwear shops were among the businesses that suffered damage, according to the Athens Chamber of Commerce. Several national heritage sites were burned, including a neoclassical building from 1870, designed by German architect Ernst Ziller, which was gutted by fire, according to an emailed statement from the Athens City Hall. This is Europe in 5 years from now, the rest of Europe in 5 years, and America in 15 if we don't do something. Honestly, we owe our founding fathers a lot of credit because they designed a government that was broken on purpose. James Madison, all the other thinkers who thought up how the government should work in 1790, 1791, they were very aware of the democracy in Athens, not the one we have today, but obviously the one they studied. The democracy in Athens, the democracy in Rome, the republic in Rome. They studied it. They knew the problems that democracies and republics faced in history. So they purposely designed a broken government system in order to make the political process slow. You see, the Founding Fathers did something that was wholly different than anything ever done in political history. They made a system of governance that was neither wholly federal nor wholly national. And what that means is while there is sovereign control from a federal government over the state governments, the power of the federal government was very strong but very limited under the design in the Constitution. Now, that certainly changed over the course of 200-some years. But we owe our founding fathers for the insulation provided by the design of our government from what's happened around the world with regards to the welfare state that is driving the economy of the world down the toilet. I mean, just think about it for a second. Can you name a fiscally sound country? How many can you think of that just come to mind the minute I say fiscally sound country? How many countries can you name? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? I'm curious. How many can you think of? Fiscally sound countries. The debt this year reached $15 trillion. It's surely $15.5 trillion since I've last looked. It's now arguably greater than the size of our economy. That's a problem, ladies and gentlemen. But there's hope. There is hope because of people like this. Now, if you haven't heard about this, it's a little old by this point, but by yesterday, this YouTube video had received more than 21 million views, and I've picked a little excerpt out of it that is pretty interesting. And it's the video is littered with foul language, but I've got the portion that does not have any foul language. But there's a girl who posted on Facebook, this man's daughter, ranting about having to do chores. And she ranted on Facebook, and she thought she could hide it on Facebook. You can hide your Facebook posts from certain people if you like to. Anyway, she hid it from her dad. Well, her dad is an IT guy, so he managed to figure out a way to see the post. This 15-year-old girl apparently doesn't like doing chores and likes to get lots of things for free. Well, the day prior to the publication of this video, or the production of this video, Dad had spent about $120 or $130 on software and fixing his daughter's laptop, and she posted a very ungrateful letter on Facebook. You can read more about it online. I encourage you to search for it. But there is hope for the country, and I'm going to tell you why. Because this is about 7 or 8 minutes into this man's response to his daughter's Facebook page, and he is absolutely irate with his daughter, because it's not the first time she's done this. So basically, 15-year-old brat posts on Facebook about how terrible her life is. She doesn't have to work, but she doesn't get all the things that she wants, and Dad looks like he's pretty well off. He looks like he works real hard, and in the video he says, look, when I was your age, at 15, I had dropped out of high school, gone to college, worked 2 jobs, and went to college. He worked very hard for everything he has and works very hard to give her the life that she has. And basically, she's extremely ungrateful for the things that she has and is very disrespectful to her parents, her father and stepmother in particular, in a rant that she posted to be cute on Facebook. Well, here's the interesting portion of the father's video, and you'll have to go by the sound here, but Dad's got a pistol on his hip, and the laptop is sitting outside on the ground, and here, just listen.
I mean, there was more curse words in that one post, just ridiculous. Not happening. Disrespectful to me, your mother, your stepmother, your family, your friends, and yourself. So I'm going to put a stop to it, and I'm going to put a stop to it right now. That right there is your laptop. You see it's out here on the ground. This right here is my .45. That was the first round. These are exploding hollow point rounds. Yeah, and you have to pay me back for these too, because these are about $1 a piece. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh yeah, and after that comment you made about your mom told me to be sure I put one in there for her. So that one's from her. And if I got one left, I got 2 left. Now I'm out. So, just for the record, whenever you're not grounded, whenever year that happens to be, you can have a new laptop when you buy a new laptop. And when you pay me back the $130 for the software I spent on yours yesterday.
All right, so that's about all I'm going to play of that video. But anyway, there's hope for America, ladies and gentlemen. There is hope for Tommy Jordan from Stanley County, who got mad after his daughter complained about doing chores on her Facebook page. The video has received more than 21 million views as of yesterday afternoon. The former Marine wrote on his Facebook page yesterday that Child Protective Services officials came to his home in Stanley County on Saturday and interviewed him and his daughter separately after viewers of the video called with concerns about his actions. He said the police also stopped by. The police, by the way, said, "Kudos, sir," Jordan wrote. "I actually had a thank you from an entire detective squad, and another police officer is using it in a positive manner in his presentation for the school system. How's about those apples? Didn't expect that when the cops called you," Jordan wrote on his Facebook page. Police officials in Albemarle told Channel 9 they have received dozens of calls and emails asking why they haven't done anything about the video. Well, officials said that Jordan lives outside of the city limits, so his actions are outside of their jurisdictions. So, concerned people called officials at Stanley County Sheriff's Office. And they say there are no laws against what Tommy Jordan did, so they won't be investigating the matter. Ladies and gentlemen, there is hope for America. Athens burns, and Tommy Jordan shoots his daughter's laptop after she rants on Facebook. Back after the break. Good morning, and we are back. Athens is ablaze. I'm not kidding. Some of you might think I'm kidding, but literally, buildings are on fire in Athens. Like 4 dozen buildings are on fire in Greece because of austerity measures imposed upon Greece by the IMF. Because the IMF said, look, we've bailed you out a couple times already. If you want more bailout, you got to play ball. There is a German official sitting in the Greece Treasury Department right now with a fine-tooth comb over every dollar coming out of that Treasury Department. Now, do you want China to be the one with a fine-tooth comb over our Treasury Departments here in 10 years? Which is the time frame in which I'm suggesting we may have a problem if we don't solve this. But again, there's hope. While the future may look bleak, there is hope for America because of people like Tommy Jordan, who... It's an amazing video. You should really YouTube it if you have some spare time. Just look for Father Shoots Girl's Laptop on Google. And it's an 8-minute video, and any parent out there should be proud as they could ever be of a parent for standing up against their snot-nosed kid. So is there hope for America? Now, I want to refer to a news story earlier today. Let me roll back here for... I'm going to pretend I'm Rush Limbaugh and shake some papers around the microphone so it looks like I'm doing something productive. So in talking about the president's budget, which was released on Monday, $1.3 trillion in new debt in the budget. Usually the debt ends up being a little more than that because if you haven't learned by now, Congress and the president, the White House, the administration, anytime they produce a budget forecast, they're a little on the optimistic side, and that's being nice to say that they're a little on the optimistic side. Anyway, so here's some of the nonsense that leads me to believe that we are Greece in 10 years. Tom Graves, the current District 9 congressman who may be representing a new district that he's running for that includes Haralson County, is sure to point out that the president's plan calls for $350 billion in short-term stimulus-style spending for job creation. Among that, an $8 billion job plan that I've got from the Daily Caller that I was reading earlier this morning. But from our news story this morning, I thought this was beyond ridiculous. It increases the TSA tax about $5 on airline tickets over the next 6 years, with most of that money going toward deficit reduction. Really? $5 tax increase on airline tickets, and that's how we're going to... I just find that absurd. Well, we need to solve the debt problem, and the debt problem largely being driven by entitlement spending. Now, we spend a few $100 billion on wars, too, and over 10, 15 years, that's a lot of money. It is. People are exactly right when they say the wars are expensive. But they aren't nearly as expensive as the budgets for Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, which are ballooning out of control. The elephant in the room is entitlement spending. Period. End of story. Yes, the wars are expensive, but they account for about 20% of the federal budget. Entitlements, last I checked, were over 60% of the federal budget. And discretionary spending makes up around that other 20% or so. It's pretty wild. Now, get this. This also from the Daily Caller. The White House intends to boost government subsidies for wealthy buyers of the Chevy Volt. And how they get this is pretty interesting. Right now, if you buy a Chevy Volt, this is the electric gas hybrid from Chevy, and I think the car is around $45,000 or $50,000. It ain't cheap. The mammoth subsidy would cost taxpayers $100 million each year if it is approved by Congress, presuming that only 10,000 new technology cars are sold each year. But the administration wants to get 1 million of these types of cars on the road by 2015. The subsidy cost of that goal could reach $10 billion. Now, here's the interesting thing. Who are the people receiving these subsidies? Now, the president is a big fan of wealth redistribution. So here we are putting taxpayers on the hook right now for $7,500 for a subsidy for the Chevy Volt. The president wants it to be $10,000, which is a 33% jump from the current subsidy. But Volt buyers are already among the wealthiest Americans. And the subsidy will also extend to other cars, not just the Chevy Volt, perhaps the Nissan Leaf. What's interesting here is Pennsylvania Republican Representative Mike Kelly, who owns a Chevy dealership no less, has already introduced legislation to end auto subsidies. The country is $15.2 trillion in debt, quote, and climbing. So we've got to be a lot more careful about how we spend money, he told the Daily Caller back in January. The bill, he said, would also help citizens recognize the money-losing crony capitalist deals between Democratic legislators and business interests such as Chevy. And he says, how do we get this crony capitalism across to the voters? Well, we tell them, folks, it's your money, not the administration's money. It's being thrown around by the president. So get this. The average income of the Chevy Volts buyers is $170,000 a year, according to General Motors CEO Dan Akerson. Some of them, he says, I think roughly half are either Toyota Prius or BMW owners already, Akerson said in a December 16th interview with the AP. That income of $170,000 a year puts Volts buyers in the top 7% of households, according to census data, and slightly above the rankings held by households with BMWs, Lexuses, or Cadillacs. The average income of BMW buyers is nearly $170,000, according to a May 2010 article in Bloomberg. Cadillac buyers right around $130,000, and Lexus buyers take home an average of $141,000. The only income group that buys more expensive cars, or expensive cars being Mercedes-Benz drivers, they earn more than Volt drivers at an average of $174,000 a year. So here the government is writing $10,000 checks, right now $7,500 checks, but they'd like to write $10,000 checks to people who earn $170,000 a year. This is the type of insanity that leads to Greece. This is why 45 buildings in Athens are on fire this morning, smoldering at least. When does it end? When do people wake up and realize that the country is out of control when we're writing checks to people who are wealthy? We'll take a quick break, and I'll be back with a quote from Benjamin Franklin I'm thinking of. I actually found one better. I did myself one better in the break. I found a better quote, actually. It's from an Englishman, Alexander Fraser Tytler, known as Lord Woodhouseley, who wrote, "A democracy cannot exist as a permanent form of government. It can only exist until the voters discover they can vote themselves largesse from the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority always votes for the candidates promising the most benefits from the public treasury, with the result that a democracy always collapses over loose fiscal policy, always followed by a dictatorship." And that's what we have to remember here, is that the minute people can vote themselves the treasury, they will. Rich, poor, middle class, doesn't matter. Obama's $3.8 trillion budget requests $901 billion in deficit spending, following $1.33 trillion in deficit spending during this year. The spending will boost the nation's debt well past $16 trillion by October of next year. At the rate it's growing, we're going to see $16 trillion by this year. We have to realize how optimistic the Congressional Budget Office is, the White House Budget Office is. High spending threatens to shift the public's focus back towards the federal government's spending habits. The concern boosted the GOP back in the 2010 election. If the debt hits $16 trillion by November, and it might, I don't see how it couldn't. But this has since been muffled by the Democrats and the media's shared focus on income inequality and the now abandoned Occupy protests. Now, we go to TV Troy, a former official in George W. Bush's administration, who, responding to President Obama's budget proposal, he says it doesn't seem to comprehend the enormity of the debt situations we face. He says, "I was hoping for some real adjustments in spending levels. These political budgets are not helping us come to grips with our long-term financial disasters," he told the caller. It's about time the country has to come to grips with our spending, because reckless spending is the trademark of this presidency. And with an election year like this, his budget proposal is absolutely 100% a campaign document. It is a promise to special interests that spending will go their way. When members can vote themselves the Treasury, it becomes completely political. Politicians love it. Republican, Democrat, it doesn't matter. The problem gets exacerbated every year because of the precedent we've set by rent seeking, is what we call it in economics, where a politically interested body goes to the government and seeks protection. That's exactly what all of this is. The new 10-year blueprint for Obama's budget shows annual deficits exceeding $600 billion every year except 2018. Now, again, this is highly optimistic. Remember, since Obama's been in office, the deficit hasn't been less than $1 trillion, and all of a sudden the yearly deficit is going to be cut in half for the 10-year projection. These projections are never on spot. It doesn't matter who's in office. It doesn't matter if, George W. Bush did the same thing. It's completely political. But they set these things up with weird accounting tricks. They assume lots of pretty grandiose things like the war's ending. Back when we were doing budget forecasts in 2006, 2007, 2008, everybody was assuming that the wars would be over in 2 years, especially because President Obama campaigned on ending the wars. Debt held by outside investors would grow to $18.7 trillion by 2021. And that's with the optimistic projection. If you look at real-world debt clock, if you, instead of looking at Congressional Budget Office projections, which again are extremely optimistic, if you look at the current track record to date, if the current rate of spending stays at what it is, the debt is $4 or $5 trillion higher in the same time period. It is beyond absurd. So who do we trust? It's like the campaign finance reform legislation. Who thought that was a good idea? I have no clue. Here's the problem. People complain that money is too much involved in politics because of the way campaign contributions are structured, the way they're not, you have a cap or a limit, or it's unlimited in some areas, and 527s, 501c3s, however you want to frame the argument. Money's too loose in politics. So who do they go to fix the problem but politicians in Washington? Gee, that's a great idea. Let's ask the people who created the problem to solve the problem. It never works. It's why Social Security is still broken. It's why Medicare and Medicaid are still broken. The unfunded liabilities for the next 10 years in this country number around $130 trillion. This is a fact. The Congressional Budget Office will tell us that, if you want to believe them, but Lawrence Kotlikoff at Boston University, an economist who does the fair tax, has been saying this for 6 years. Finally, the Congressional Budget Office admits it. All of the money in the world, if you could liquefy the economies of all the world, if you could liquefy all the money in the world, you took everything and converted it into cash, all the liquefiable assets in the world, all of the income, and you just took it all, you'd have about $80 trillion. $80 trillion, that is a lot of money. And yet, all of the money in the world is not enough to cover our financial obligations. We're Greece, folks. Plain and simple. Now, will Washington, D.C. be set on fire? I don't know. We're an awfully big country, too. We have 310 million people in the country. There's also about 250 million guns in the country, too. So things might look a little different than in Greece. We may have another American Revolution on our hands. And it was Thomas Jefferson, actually, that said, every 20 years, there ought to be a revolution. Now, did he mean that legislatively or literally? It's kind of hard to tell. It really is. I don't get it. How can you still support Barack Obama if you look back at the profligacy of George W. Bush? I don't get it. You look back and think of George W. Bush as this profligate, doesn't care about how to pay for the war, how to pay for new medical entitlement stuff. I'm serious. If you take away the tax cuts, the Bush tax cuts, Obama and Bush are far more similar than they are different. That may be hard to hear. President Bush also inherited a rough economy. There was a recession in 2000, 2001. I think people forget. Economic growth fell, which is why Bush called for the tax cuts. He wouldn't. If the economy was so great when Clinton handed it to him, why would he bother cutting taxes if things were going great the way they were? But Bush, to emulate Reagan, cut taxes when the economy was rough, and the economy got better. You can compare the recovery. When Bush got into office, when Reagan got into office, and when Obama got into office, all facing recessions. Reagan's arguably worse with stagflation in the 70s. But look whose recovery is faster. To call our recovery meager at best and that's okay is a fallacy. We need to look at history and see what's worked in history and go from there, if you ask me. But hope you enjoyed the program. Hopefully we won't be setting buildings on fire in Washington, D.C. in 15 or 20 years. Or 5 years. Who knows when it's going to be. But this is what's coming. Buildings set ablaze in the Capitol.